Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. For anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. The beginning of this year, 2023, actually marks my 11 years of being out, and I am so super grateful for the ways my life has unfolded since. I now work with survivors of coercive control, and I'm going to take a moment here to define this term, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe. I view coercive control as a social issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and I'm just beginning a new element of my career as an expert witness for legal cases that involve coercive control. As a certified trauma professional, I work with survivors. I'm especially excited to be offering a group survivor program for cult and religious abuse recovery. So this is not a support group, but rather a healing program. It's based on my certification in the incredible work of Dr. Jilly Jenkinson, who gathered decades of research on survivors to create a body of work that I would consider to be the most comprehensive and flexible approach I've come across in this field. We will meet every other week for 6 months, and registration will open in February of 2023 for those interested. Lastly, I am also a research associate at Salford University and explore topics related to coercive control. So let's jump back into a basic understanding of coercive control before I introduce the next episode. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Then gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It may be helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in many cases, in intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know by subscribing and comment with kindness. And always think critically, trust your intuition, and be free. Hello, friends, and welcome to this Project Hope podcast episode. We have such a treat for you today. As a friendly reminder, please do take care of yourself as you listen. as I understand these can be very sensitive topics, and in both my intro and interview itself, there's language that is inappropriate for children. Our guest today is Dr. Marlene Winell. She's the founder and director of Journey Free. She does individual religious recovery counseling, facilitates groups, teaches, and trains professionals in the field of religious trauma. This is, in fact, how I know Dr. Winell, as I am a part of her Helping Professionals group. So, if you are a professional working with clients with religious trauma, you may want to consider joining us. We meet monthly to discuss special topics and working with this population. It's also an opportunity to discuss cases, as well as receive peer support. There's also access to relevant research and academic articles, and some of the topics that we've most recently covered include purity culture and sexual healing, fear of hell, using psychedelics for treatment, homeschooling in fundamentalist communities, and sometimes we as the professionals will contribute on particular topics. So Dr. Winell has studied with leaders in the field of trauma treatment, such as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Eric Gentry, and takes a body-oriented approach to religious trauma recovery. Born and raised overseas by missionary parents, Marlene was immersed in fundamentalist Christianity from childhood. She moved away from that religion during college and found the transition process so difficult and intriguing that she began to research it professionally. In 1994, she published Leaving the Fold, a guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion, which has become a leading self-help book in the field of religious recovery. In 2011, she named religious trauma syndrome. Her undergraduate studies were in social ecology at the University of California, Irvine, where she focused on mental health and juvenile justice. She went on to earn a master's in social ecology with a special study of marriage and family relations. After a few years of working with adolescent programs, she earned her doctorate from Penn State in Human Development and Family Studies. Dr. Winell's academic teaching began at Penn State and continued at Colorado State University, where she taught courses in adult development. At Boulder Graduate School and University of California, Santa Cruz, she taught communication skills for personal relationships and skills for living in a diverse society. She was licensed as a psychologist in Colorado, where she had a private therapy practice. She also worked as a psychologist in Australia for 7 years before relocating to California. It has been her privilege over the years to supervise other therapists and teach subjects in psychotherapy. At present, Marlene is based in Western Massachusetts. So I wanted to just mention a little more about Marlene's book. Leaving the Fold is a self-help book that examines the effects of authoritarian religion on individuals who leave the faith. The concrete steps for healing are useful for anyone in recovery from toxic religion. So just to review a couple of the topics you'll discover: what you can expect about stages of religious recovery, information about the key issues of recovery, relevant family dynamics, the power of manipulations, motivations for belonging and for leaving religion, specific steps for healing and reclaiming life, further steps for rebuilding life in the present. So as you will hear her discuss in our interview, Marlene was the first to name religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome in her academic articles published in 2011. So I want to just take a little moment to share about religious trauma for those who may never have heard this term or could use some elaboration to understand it a little better. As we discussed in this interview, we have both received reports from survivors who are especially grateful to hear this definition. to have their lived experience validated with a label that identifies that which they haven't been able to put together or perhaps understand in its fullness. And you will find all of this information on the Journey Free website, and the link is in the show notes. So religious trauma syndrome is the condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. They may be going through the shattering of a personally meaningful faith and or breaking away from a controlling community and lifestyle. Religious trauma syndrome is a function of both the chronic abuses of harmful religion and the impact of severing one's connection with one's faith. It can be compared to a combination of PTSD and CPTSD, or complex PTSD, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder. Religious trauma syndrome has a very recognizable set of symptoms, a definitive set of causes, and a debilitating cycle of abuse. There are ways to stop the abuse and recover. So first, I'm going to review the symptoms of religious trauma syndrome from the cognitive, emotional, social, and cultural frameworks. So the cognitive symptoms include confusion, poor critical thinking ability, negative beliefs about self-ability and self-worth, black and white thinking, perfectionism, and difficulty with decision-making. On an emotional level, some of the symptoms we see include depression, anxiety, anger, grief, loneliness, difficulty with pleasure, and loss of meaning. In terms of the social symptoms, we find a loss of the social network, family rupture, social awkwardness, sexual difficulty, behind schedule on developmental tasks. And that especially applies to those who are born in. And symptoms culturally, unfamiliarity with the secular world, so that's like the fish out of water feelings, difficulty in belonging, and also information gaps. So some examples of that might be, modern art, music, things that society has been watching on television, kind of cultural evolution shifts. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the causes of religious trauma syndrome. This is authoritarianism coupled with toxic theology, which is received and reinforced at church, school, and home, and typically results in a suppression of normal childhood development, so the suppression of the cognitive, social, emotional, moral stages. We tend to find that they're arrested in certain ways. Also, there's a damage to normal thinking and feeling abilities because information is limited and controlled. So dysfunctional beliefs are taught, independent thinking is condemned, and feelings are condemned. The third cause, the external locus of control. Knowledge is revealed, not discovered. So those within these communities experience a hierarchy of authority which is enforced, and the self is not a reliable or good source. So always looking outside, either to the Bible, to the leader, but certainly not oneself or one's intuition or feelings. Okay. And then the last cause, physical and sexual abuse or patriarchal power. So this includes unhealthy sexual views and punishment used as discipline. Okay, so a little about the cycle of abuse. And this is something actually that Marlene refers to in our interview, but very interesting points here that I thought you all might find interesting. Okay, so the cycle of abuse. The doctrines of original sin and eternal damnation cause the most psychological distress by creating the ultimate double bind. You are guilty and responsible and face eternal punishment, yet you have no ability to do anything about it. And these are teachings of fundamentalist Christianity. However, other authoritarian religions have equally toxic doctrines. You must conform to a mental test of believing in an external, unseen source for salvation and maintain this state of belief until death. You cannot ever stop sinning altogether, so you must continue to confess and be forgiven, hoping that you have met the criteria despite complete lack of feedback about whether you will actually make it to heaven. Salvation is not a free gift after all. For the sincere believer, this results in an unending cycle of shame and relief. And now to say a few things about stopping the cycle. You can stop the cycle of abuse, but leaving the faith is a, quote, mixed blessing. Letting go of the need to conform is a huge relief. There's a sense of freedom, excitement about information and new experiences, newfound self-respect, integrity, and the sense of an emerging identity. There are huge challenges as well. The psychological damage does not go away overnight. In fact, because the phobia indoctrination in young childhood is so powerful, the fear of hell can last a lifetime despite rational analysis. Likewise, the damage to self-esteem and basic self-trust can be crippling. This is why there are so many thousands of walking wounded, people who have left fundamentalist religion and are living with religious trauma syndrome. And now we'll address mistaken identity. So religious trauma syndrome mimics the symptoms of many other disorders. Those include post-traumatic stress disorder, clinical depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, OCD, borderline personality, eating disorders, social disorders, marital and sexual dysfunctions, suicide, drugs and alcohol abuse, extreme antisocial behavior, including homicide. So there are many extreme cases, including child abuse of all kinds, suicide, rape, and murder. Not as extreme, but also tragic, are all the people who are struggling to make sense of life after losing their whole basis of reality. None of the previously named diagnoses quite tells the story, and many who try to get help from the mental health profession cannot find a therapist who understands. So what's the problem? We have in our society an assumption that religion is for the most part benign or good for you. Therapists, like others, expect that if you stop believing, you just quit going to church, putting it in the same category as not believing in Santa Claus. Some people also consider religious beliefs childish, so you just grow out of them, simple as that. Therapists don't often understand fundamentalism, and they even recommend spiritual practices as part of therapy. In general, people who have not survived an authoritarian fundamentalist indoctrination do not realize what a complete mind rape it really is. In the United States, we also treasure our Bill of Rights, our freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. This makes it extremely difficult to address a debilitating disorder like religious trauma syndrome without threatening the majority of Americans. Raising questions about toxic beliefs and abusive practices in religion seems to be violating a taboo. No one wants to be pointing fingers for fear of tampering with our precious freedoms. But this is the problem. Sanitizing religion makes it all the more insidious when it is toxic. For example, small children are biologically dependent on their adult caretakers. Built into their survival mechanisms is a need to trust authority just to stay alive. Religious teachings take hold easily in their underdeveloped brains, while the adults conveniently keep control. This continues generation after generation as the religious meme complex reproduces itself and masses of believers learn to value self-loathing and fear apocalypse. But there is hope. Awareness is growing about the dangers of religious indoctrination. There are more and more websites to support the growing number of people leaving harmful religion. Services are growing to help people with religious trauma syndrome heal and grow. We are discovering the means by which people can understand what they have been through and take steps to become healthy, happy human beings. So welcome, Dr. Marlene Winell, to the Project Hope podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to just begin by taking a little dive into your history, and if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of from the religious perspective and maybe just the dynamic of your family as you were raised.
Okay. Yeah, I was born into a missionary family. My parents were Assemblies of God missionaries in China and in Hong Kong and then Taiwan. I was born in Hong Kong.
Oh.
And then shortly after that, moved to Taiwan, where I grew up. And spent the last years that I was there in a Christian boarding school. And so I was very deeply entrenched in the indoctrination, you might say, into fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. And I took it very, very seriously. I was kind of a Jesus freak myself. I've always been a passionate kind of person, and I was passionately in love with Jesus. I sometimes have called him my first lover. It's my imaginary friend, was very, very dear to me. And those were my teenage years. When I was 16, we moved to Southern California. It was 1968, Summer of Love. And the Christian hippie movement was also in swing by then. So I started going to Calvary Chapel, which was like the Christian answer to the peace and love hippie movement. And so we were baptizing people at the beach and going to church barefoot, and we thought we were pretty cool. But we also believed that Jesus was coming back any day. And we were very serious about witnessing, proselytizing, and we do that door to door at the beach and all around. And we were quite intent on that. Then I went to college. I've always been a serious student, got good grades in school, and I always read a lot. And so college at a secular called University of California was very broadening, very eye-opening. My parents made the mistake of valuing education and pushing my school abilities. And so what happened was I found out a lot more about the world, taking classes in history, psychology, literature, art, how it is when you're it's kind of a big candy store and learning things, anthropology. And so I would describe my leaving the faith as a combination of pushes and pulls. The pushes were things that I became disillusioned with. My church that I was going to was pretty patriarchal, and as I was getting older and taking courses in school, I learned about feminism, and that really kind of changed my outlook on the way that the ministers at church were controlling everything and not allowing me to do things in leadership because I had the wrong genitalia. I thought that was a bit much.
Yeah.
And then also learning about the Bible,
Yeah.
taking a Bible as literature kind of course at school and finding out where the Bible actually came from, not reading the Bible itself in terms of what's in it, because I had done plenty of that,
Right.
but more the origins of the Bible and the Old Testament. And so this kind of started me on a search for the truth about everything.
Yeah.
And I think actually I've concluded that people have this tension between comfort and truth. It's very comforting, some of the things in religion. It was very nice to be able to speak with God every day. Very reassuring to have this book that was supposed to be the literal word of God, every word, and also really comforting to go to church and have a youth group and have this community. There are a lot of pluses. And so, and also the comfort of being told that you're going to go to heaven when you die and be with God, the idea that your afterlife is taken care of. There's so much that's reassuring and comforting about the religion that it's not that simple to just leave, right? When you have a problem with it. And so a lot of people stay forever because they just don't want to give that up. But for me, the truth was more important than that. I really wanted to know what was true about it. It doesn't matter if something's comforting, if it's just not true, right? So I learned a lot, and then so those were like the pushes. The pulls were uh, were about new people that I met, new non-Christian people who had coherent views of the world, other worldviews, other ways of humanism, even socialism, or political differences. All the ways of looking at the world, because we were taught that there was no other way of looking at the world that made any sense, that wasn't evil, that wasn't just wrong and empty. So finding out that there were other points of view, studying philosophy was a real eye-opener. Man, these questions that we thought we had a handle on that no one else could answer are big questions that people have been asking for hundreds of years. And there are lots of points of view. And it was kind of exciting, really. And then also meeting people that had other religious views. Like there was one couple that I met that were they were in an Eastern religion, and they went on about how much it had changed their lives, had affected their health, helped their marriage. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, those are things that Christians claim.
Yeah.
Other people can claim some of the same. And also traveling. I did, traveling, and I had obviously lived overseas already, but just meeting people and finding out that the world is a lot bigger than I realized. And that people were not necessarily all crazy or evil or stupid, these ideas that we had about everybody who's not a Christian.
Yeah.
And then the world is filled with sin. And I studied psychology, and psychology has a very different view of what makes people tick. And it's not based on the notion of sin, right? And little children are going through child development stages. They're not just being bad and wrong because they have a sin nature. That whole idea just got overturned. I had assignments working in preschools and things like that. I got a degree in social ecology, which required field studies in the community, and that was really helpful too. So anyway, over the college years, I was in a real relationship with a man, so I had real physical comfort and hugs that were real and not just imaginary, right? Human touch, human contact, which kind of broke my addiction to Jesus, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So got married, and then eventually
Can I
went
ask
to
you,
graduate school. Go
can I
ahead.
ask you there around the college experience, do you think that it was as you were opening to the excitement of kind of all this new information and different viewpoints, were you simultaneously feeling a guilt as you were kind of considering looking at the Bible in a different way? Or did college kind of allow that permission that one maybe can't give themselves?
Oh, well, some guilt, yes, but more just confusion and feeling pretty disturbed, like how could this all not be true? This is what I've known. This is what I've been taught. This is what all these people around me believe. Hook, line, and sinker. How on earth could it be wrong? And being very disturbed and sort of fighting for it for a while. Like with the sexism. Looking at the Bible. Oh, it's got this cultural context, and that's the way they did things back then. So that's a big excuse for it. And even in my work, for assignments in school, for a long time, I had this whole Christian lens on it.
Oh, interesting. Of course. Yes.
And like a funny example that I'm kind of embarrassed about, I was taking a psychology course in behavior change, which was mainly, the behavioral approach to doing psychotherapy and how do you work with somebody who's trying to change their behavior, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote a paper about witnessing to somebody to try to get them to accept Jesus. That was the behavior change that I chose for my assignment. It was just crazy because I was hanging on. I hung on for quite a while, and I must admit the teachers were pretty gentle. Like, are you sure this is what you want to be working on? And put up with some of that.
Well, how kind. And also, who knows the level of awareness that they had around that. But we know that it really is that kindness kind of from the others, not in our world, that can also sometimes sort of remove.
Yeah, having the fruits of the Spirit. That was the thing. Because in my family, the Assemblies of God is a Pentecostal denomination. And I was pretty involved in that. I spoke in tongues. I believed in healings and all kinds of, gifts of the Spirit, and this whole magical view, and very, very intense, very emotional. So giving that up was a big thing too, because it was emotionally so close to me.
Well, and when you say that actually your first love was Jesus, really, for those in the audience who maybe have not had that experience, it's real, right? And especially up with that, that is a true, deep, emotional, real connection that you believed from your little world into a, teen adulthood, really.
Yeah.
Very big deal.
Yeah. I knew all the songs. I could quote the Bible. I was deep into it. Yeah. But anyway, coming out was a lot. It took years. It took years, really. It took, the college years and a little bit after that. When I first got married, I was still Christian. I was only 20 years old, getting married young.
Yeah.
And
may I ask, was your husband, did you meet him in college, or was he affiliated at all with Christianity?
He was not at the college. I met him outside the college, but he was also one of my converts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've heard since then, I've heard this phrase, evangelical dating, where you date somebody for the purpose of witnessing to them and converting them. Yeah. And I sort of did that. Yeah. And he came around, he became a Christian, started going to that same church. Later on, when things were coming apart, we both left. Yeah. It wasn't difficult to convince him that it wasn't really working.
Yeah. Funny how that happens. And so then may I ask, also around this time, assuming that your family unit of origin was still practicing and fully engaged in that community, what was kind of happening between you and your parents, and what were you kind of considering? Was that part of the consideration and struggle of my whole family's in and I may lose them, or I don't know what the repercussions may have been for you that you were considering?
Well, I knew that it was going against what they believed, but if I raised questions or wanted to discuss any of the problems that I was having with it, those discussions did not go anywhere. And my parents were pretty entrenched, and I think they were concerned about me. But for the most part, this was my own journey. I was having these internal battles, and in school, and I was writing in my journal about all these conflicts, these terrible inner conflicts I was having. So they weren't really privy to most of it, actually.
Yes, that makes sense. Wow. So tell us about kind of the continued journey then.
Well, I went to graduate school, got a PhD in human development, because after studying psychology, I got more interested in prevention and development on the healthy side of things, to help people with that. And so I worked on that. And then after that, I taught at Colorado State University, and then I got my psychologist license in Colorado. And shortly after that, started working on my book. My book was something that it took me 4 years to write. And
Wow.
it started off with just a little paper that I wrote. I wrote this simple paper called The Psychological Consequences of Fundamentalism or something. But I gave the paper at an APA conference.
Okay, this is what I have in my mind as part of this story, was kind of the response from the group propelling you to go, oh, other people are recognizing this as well.
Yeah, I had no idea what the response would be. This was, way back when. And people were very interested. And I remember I was in New York for this conference, and I was in the elevator, and I had copies of my paper, and somebody looked over and saw the title and said, "Can I have a copy of that?" And this was before any talk about religious trauma was going on at all. And nobody was talking about this. So I had really no idea whether anybody could relate, because originally like that particular piece, I basically wrote for myself. I just, listed all the things that I felt like I was going through as a result of my training. And then after that, I decided that it could be a paper. But mostly I was trying to figure out what was happening with me as a result, and what some of the recovery issues were.
Right.
Like what happens if you've been taught from early childhood that you're born bad, you're born in sin. I mean, what happens to how you feel about yourself if that's like in your core, or being afraid about what's going to happen to you when you die, or being afraid of the world, being afraid of other people, these fears that get taught to you. So I was writing about my own process to begin with, and then sharing it with other people. And then also when I was in my private practice, in the course of talking to clients, in the course of an intake, for example, asking them about their religious history, which isn't normally part of a psychology intake. People ask about substance abuse in the family. They ask about parents and siblings and all kind education. You do an intake interview, it covers all these subjects, and religion is usually not in there, because there's this assumption in our culture that religion is good for you, or at least benign.
Well, and isn't it interesting, because I believe actually that you and I prior have had a conversation around sort of this discovery that even to date, we as counselors or helpers are not asking that question on the intake.
Yeah, I know. And I hope that's changing. But at this stage, I don't know of any courses, for example, in any therapist training programs
Right.
that have to do with religion, because it gets treated as part of cultural diversity.
Yes.
And therefore it's kind of hands off. We have to respect diversity and support somebody's belief system, and help. And if it's not going well, you try to help them see it in a better light, or reframe it, make sure that you're experiencing God as a loving God and not punitive, that kind of thing. I mean, I've heard papers on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think I'm sure, I would assume that if I've had this experience, you've had this experience where there have been numerous people that have come to me and have reported that they have seen other therapists prior.
Mm-hmm.
That there was just such a disconnect around the religious topic,
Mm-hmm.
and that they just kind of didn't get it, because how could you get it unless you've actually understood and had training in this arena?
Yeah, plus it's mixed. It's, like I said before, there are all these positives that people get from religion. And there are all these, surveys that show that people who are religious are coping better with life and happier, without, I mean, there's all sorts of methodological problems with those studies. But therapists have been more likely to try to help a person make their religion work for them than to give it up. And because it's mixed, they don't necessarily see the underbelly or the dark side, right? And they don't want to deal with that, or they don't really even know about it, because unless it's their own personal experience. Yeah. So, yeah, that's why, I have a lot of clients who have had frustrations with therapists that just they not only don't get it, but they don't do their homework to find out.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting kind of phenomenon. I mean, maybe for me, it's because I'm a little earlier in my career, but I feel like I'm a research fiend. It's like anything that a client kind of brings that might feel a little unknown to me or out of scope, I'm constantly, looking.
Good. As you should. I think therapists should always do their homework.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if this might be a good area for the audience. I was sharing with Marlene that I read the book probably 2.5 years ago or so. And in preparation for this interview, I had gone through it again, and just how brilliantly it is laid out. The whole structure of it, and the kind of unfoldment with the explanation, that you kind of give us your own story. You introduce us to recognizing manipulations, the process of breaking away, the role of kind of the family background. And then as we enter into the healing, I also appreciate, the resources that you provide within the text, but also these principles around the inner child and the idea monster, which are just so powerful. And it's interesting for me having a little more of a, where I've got kind of the more culty bent on things, and maybe I'm in these other worlds of Eastern religions and those kinds of things. And yet this work applies to everyone, whether it was Eastern or, obviously, as you very clearly state in this book, that it really does apply beyond fundamentalist Christianity, and you trust, the reader to have their own ability to sort what applies to them or not.
Yeah. And that was the publisher's suggestion, actually, was for me to focus on one area, one evangelical Christianity, and then let other people make the connections, rather than trying to write a book about all the religions.
Yes. Even in the cult recovery context, so many individuals are working with the inner child, or these ideas of kind of how to sort through and challenge the beliefs that we took in that weren't necessarily of us. And this reminds me so much of kind of your inner child work and the idea monster. Do you mind saying a little bit about those?
No, not at all. The inner child work obviously predates me, with Bradshaw and other folks. it's a very powerful metaphor, really. I mean, it's talking about a part of yourself, a part of your personality that is basically innocent and like a child and just wants to live and be happy, and that needs care. This very precious core part of you that needs a lot of TLC. And unfortunately, in the religious context, there isn't that kind of recognition of childhood as being innocence like that, right? So to actually recognize that you have this part of you, and then exercise your inner adult, which is another aspect of your personality that can be wise and rational and strong and care for the child. To recognize that as being real also is a very huge paradigm shift. Because the other thing that you get taught in these kind of religions is that you don't really have any inner resources. You're empty, you're incapable, you're weak. The songs that people sing are so full of this, very degrading. And, you're not supposed to be going within to find inner strength or love or wisdom. You're supposed to be getting all of that from outside, there's and so people don't necessarily have a sense of being able to think clearly, to feel their own feelings and trust themselves to guide their own lives or to care for the child. So a big part of recovery, and I would say the central part of recovery, is to learn how to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And some of that is just recognizing that you are basically innocent and good, and you deserve all of the caretaking that you can get, and that you can provide a lot of that for yourself. You don't have to have somebody else tell you what to do in every turn.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And in some cases, what a daunting process that is with individuals, which is common, right? To go, I don't even know what I need, or that I'm allowed to have an opinion or a desire, right?
Oh, yeah. And having needs is like somehow wrong, right?
Right.
And so identifying that you have needs and that you can advocate to meet those needs is a foreign concept, and people feel really guilty and selfish when they do that.
Yes. And then in that process, how amazing kind of that discovery of that inner resource, and how freeing to be able to know that, that we can resource for ourselves, that we can generate those feelings also that maybe need replacement, like love and compassion and care that we were hoping for from that outside source.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And do you mind saying a little bit about the idea monster? Because I just this one.
The idea monster is kind of like what people have called the inner critic. It's that voice, that haunting voice that says really negative things that are undermining you and telling you to not try things that you want to try, or that you're not good enough, or all kinds of messages, some of which can come from the religion, but these messages can come from anywhere. They can come from the culture. They can come, like telling you look ugly because you're fat, or, can come from the culture. It can come from schools, teachers, parents. But the ones that come from the religion are especially powerful and need to be recognized. And there's basically two huge messages that I've concluded are part of the fundamentalist version of all religions. One is you're not okay.
Yeah.
And the other is you're not safe.
Oh.
And those two big ideas are like embedded in fundamentalist Christianity, but also fundamentalist versions of all the other religions. They'll contain some element like that. And so the idea monster is, I don't really consider it to be a part of self. I think of it as a set of ideas, and that's the good news about it.
Yeah.
It's like these ideas have snowballed, and they have become like an entity that can haunt you and say things to you. But it's just a set of ideas. And that's important to realize, which means you can hold them up and look at them and see, do I agree with that? And you can reject them, even though sometimes they seem like they're trying to protect you.
Yeah.
Like when you tell a child not to climb a tree because it's dangerous, that seems like protection. You're also cutting off the experience of learning how to climb a tree, right? So a lot of idea monster stuff, like don't go to this party, you're no good at meeting people. That can seem like protection, but it's dysfunctional. It's a perverted kind of protection. So I call it idea monster rather than inner critic, because it's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous to get sucked in to these messages. And it's more than just a critic. It can be a monster. It can kill you. It can drive you to suicide. It can drive you to just not living your life. Yeah. So that's why I've called it the idea monster. But it's not a real thing. It's just a set of ideas. Generally, your particular idea monster will have themes that get repeated. They're not really that original. Each person's monster. They tend to say the same things, like you're fat, and the next day you're fat. So a beginning stage is to identify what the themes and messages are that you're getting from your monster, and then learn how to do rebuttals, how to counteract it, and then how to create alternative beliefs, alternative ideas that are going to be functional and help you. They're not necessarily not going to be all positive, everything's fine in a Pollyannish kind of way, but to be grounded in reality and also be able to describe what's really going on and what your capabilities are as well.
Yeah.
So working on that whole positive side of it is equally important.
Well, and I'm sort of identifying how in the positive, part of the positive is one being truly authentic in that challenge. So to your point, it's like it doesn't have to be all, roses and butterflies wrapped up in an untruth, like, I'm not fat at all. I look this way, and not believe it. It could be, actually, I do feel like I'm a few pounds overweight, and I'm doing my best to try to change that, right?
That's a perfect example where you're being realistic, but you're also expressing what's possible.
Yeah.
And that you're working on it, and that you're in the idea monster, the language of the idea monster tends to have some characteristics. And one is that it's static. You are this, you are fat. And if you say, I may have some extra pounds, I am working on that, you're in process. Yeah. All of the alternative statements are process statements, which takes it to a whole different level.
Yes. Great clarification. Well, and just to say something about the monster name, because I know you and I had to kind of deconstruct this a little bit with my IFS background of the monster being a part or not. I remember us having that discussion, and I love this idea that the idea monster really is just a set of ideas or beliefs rolled into this monster. And interesting, because when you use the term inner critic, what that does for me personally is the inner critic I have such a kind of intimate relationship with. It does feel like a part of, or a piece of my thing that I have to work out, or that I'm in relationship with. When you say monster, because I don't really relate to parts of myself that way, and I'm not saying
good.
I'm not saying that others wouldn't, or that would, but just for myself personally, what I really loved about the monster is I actually associate with that word being a child speaking about monsters.
Monsters under your bed.
Right. And so, and I think of my niece and nephew right now, like we have all these conversation about monsters, and it's so funny what they're considering and how it scares them. And yet they also know it's not real, but there's still this kind of something around the scariness of it. And so I very much relate to this concept in a way that to me feels there's an element of it around childish thinking. And for me personally, it automatically kind of like when I see you holding up that idea monster in front, it's sort of a quirky, silly, half know-me, odd little creature, that's kind of funny in a way.
Yeah. Well, some of it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, because there's also what happens with the monster talk is it can be a slippery slope. Oh, you shouldn't go that. You're no good at making friends. You don't have very many friends. Nobody likes you. Nobody ever will like you. You're going to be lonely, and you're going to be eating cat food under a bridge and die alone. So, all the way down, and that can happen really fast.
Yeah.
To where, not connect, so that in that moment where you're not connecting with somebody, you can end up, it can get exaggerated all the way down.
Yeah.
And so it's important to know, it's important to get some of this inside information about what monster talk is, because it happens a lot of times unconsciously.
Yeah.
You're feeling really, really terrible. I mean, the clue to know that you're getting monster talk is that you're just feeling terrible. And sometimes you feel it in your body. Your gut hurts or something, and you're feeling scared, and you're not really identifying it. So what I do when I work with people is to help them identify it. Oh, you're having a monster attack. Oh, yeah. What's your monster saying? It's saying that I'm never going to connect with anybody ever, and that I'm going to die alone. Well, okay, that's good. That's good, because then you're holding it up and looking at it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Neat. Well, thank you for that, because I think that will be very helpful for people. Okay, so may we journey on then kind of into your history, just wondering about, and feel free to jump back in time if I'm jumping too ahead, but what was the actual process of kind of writing the book like for you, and then sort of birthing it into the world and how it was received and all of that?
You know what? I cannot remember what inspired me in the first place to write the book, except that the paper that I wrote had got such response. And then I figured it could be a book. And so I outlined something, sent it out to publishers, basically got negative. You can't really do that very well without an agent. So nothing much happened until it got to this one company where the two publishers that were running it were ex-Catholics, and they specialized in self-help. And they wrote to me and they said, we want it. And we skipped some steps in processing it, and they just sent me a contract. And so I started on it. And then it ended up taking a long time because it was not that easy to write. And it was I had to do a lot of personal growth of my own. And it was very much a giant personal growth, spiritual exercise over the course of 4 years. I also had a baby during that time and moved to Australia, so that complicated things. But it was frustrating at times, but also really enlightening and really exciting. I don't know what else.
Fabulous. How fabulous. Well, and tell me a little bit about where the religious trauma syndrome kind of fits into the story.
Well, I was in practice, I interviewed people for the book, and I also continued talking to clients about it pretty constantly. And I got referrals because I seemed to be the only one doing this kind of work. So I got referrals, and it just started gradually knowing more and more about the subject. And what I realized over a few years was that the problem was bigger and deeper than I even thought when I wrote the book.
Yeah.
That I hadn't really called it trauma in the book,
Yeah.
And
Huh.
I hadn't named religious trauma syndrome.
Yeah.
This was before all the trauma research was going on. So I didn't really label it that. And then later on, around 2010 or so, uh, decided to give it a name that needed a name because I was seeing a pattern.
Yeah.
People were reporting the same symptoms, and
Yeah.
there were the same core ideas that were really dysfunctional. And so I decided it needed a name, and it was a syndrome. A syndrome is just simply uh, something that names a set of symptoms that are common to a particular population. That's all a syndrome is. And that's what I was seeing. There's a pattern here. These are not just isolated, miscellaneous, unconnected cases, but there's a pattern here that religion tends to produce. That harmful religion, not all religion, but harmful religion tends to produce. So I came up with several names, sent them around to various colleagues and saying, what should we call this?
Yeah.
And the one that everybody agreed on was religious trauma syndrome.
Yeah.
And then that seemed about right. And then I wrote those articles for the British Journal.
Yeah. Well, and I know that it has been, every once in a while, even on social media, I'll see people quoting you. And
Uh,
I realize, I can kind of feel the phase that they're in, where it's like they have discovered finally some
uh,
terminology to put to what their experience is. And it's so freeing.
well, having a name has a certain impact. And I compared it to like other things that we've named, like eating disorders. We've named anorexia. And so now people who have anorexia can feel like they're not alone, number one, and also find out that there's treatment, find out that there are people who have expertise in it. It also opens the door for more research,
Yeah.
and training, academic training and research. So it has some substance to it, and it's real. A lot of them, I get mail like that all the time, where thank you for naming something. Everything's kind of falling into place for me now that I know it's real and I'm not making it up. And that's what I say to people. You're not making this up, and it's not your fault. This is a real thing. And that provides a lot of relief, actually.
Yes. Yes. And I'm so grateful for it too, because I think it straddles kind of this interesting scope where um, the word cult holds such intense meaning to it because of the history, and so many people are very uncomfortable with that. It can also add these layers of shame, of oh, I was somebody who was actually in a cult, so I think it's an interesting, there's a whole discussion in the field around that term, because some of the religious groups that are unhealthy are also so huge and so much a part of the mainstream that
Uh,
people really don't even think of that
yeah,
as culty, even though it may be similar dynamics, whether
yeah,
there's a charismatic leader or maybe a set of leaders who are not charismatic.
uh,
Both exist. But
yeah,
I think with the terminology identifying religion,
mhm,
there's a place for people to go who have come out of what I would identify as kind of culty qualities
yeah,
to an
yeah,
environment that's actually very mainstream and widely accepted. So it's
yeah.
very confusing because people don't think to put a label on it like that. And so this is where I find, you have served such kind of this missing link that is a landing pad for people to understand what's happened to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and you're right that there are big, giant organizations that are culty. How about the Catholic Church? How about, the Mormons? How about Jehovah's Witnesses? How about evangelical Christianity? There's very, if you define, I think of culty as having to do with mind control. And the fundamentalist version of all these religions is mind control.
Yep.
To not question and not trust yourself to see reality for yourself.
Yes. Yes. And, even the nuances recently, I've been watching the documentary, I think it's on Netflix, maybe, that's about La Luz del Mundo. And they started in, I believe, Mexico is where the original headquarters are. And they actually have quite a large community in LA. But it's interesting that in the story right now, and I'm not all the way done, but it's very much a focus around what was happening in kind of the inner sanctum of their leader, they call the apostle, and what was happening behind the scenes and the child abuse and the sexual abuse that was going on. But really, nobody else, if you're not in that inner sanctum, then you're a part of the congregation and unaware of all of that. Now, there may be messages happening that affect, of course, the entire congregation, which is what we're seeing in some of these, more fundamentalist, black and white, authoritarian groups. But, Marlene, it occurred to me as I'm sitting there watching the scope of how this group expanded all across the world, these massive buildings, huge numbers of people. And just that alone, to actually see it visually, gave me it had this different impact of how powerful it is when you look around you. You've got doubts, maybe a little doubt that comes up, but you look around you and all these people are absolutely enthralled. Well, that is really powerful. And to imagine when that whole congregation believes that they know the way and have the answer, to imagine inside of oneself that you could potentially be right and disagree with all these people is kind of a tough thing to wrap your mind around or to have the confidence to stand in.
Yeah. And thinking, how could all these people be wrong?
Right. Okay, so please let me know if there's anything that you'd like to share sort of between the book and now. You obviously have a very fruitful life. So anything you'd like to kind of share, either personally or also we certainly want to hear work-wise, what's kind of happening for you right now.
I think an important area of development for people coming out of religion is to recreate. You hear a lot about deconstruction, but it's also important to have reconstruction.
Yes.
To reconstruct your life. And because religion affects everything, it affects who you think you are, your identity. A lot of people, when they're Christian first, and then this, that, and the other, like Mike Pence, for example. And all there's a whole lot just like in the culture that puts pressure on you to stay in. But to reconstruct, because it tells you who you are, what the world is about, what life is, what the future holds, what other people are about, how to relate to others. It defines everything.
Yeah.
So if you think about pulling that rug out from under you, there's a couple parts to religious trauma syndrome. One is the damage done by the religion itself. Like I said, with those two ideas, you're not okay and you're not safe, those two ideas, but also all the other training that you get and all the damage done while you're in it. Okay. And that's kind of like complex PTSD, right? But the other is breaking free, the actual leaving. The actual leaving is this transformational process that is more of an event. So it's more like PTSD, an actual event. It can take a while, but it's a big transition basically from one world to another.
Yes.
You can feel like an immigrant. You can feel, like you're culturally not fitting into the whole rest of the world. And there's a whole lot of catching up to do because there are all these developmental delays. Yeah. Mentally, you don't know much about critical thinking. You don't know how to respect your own feelings. You're messed up sexually.
Yeah.
you don't know much about science. You're still wondering about evolution. There's so much that is changing. And so the reconstruction process is really important to clarify your new values, your new beliefs, and to start acting on these new things and gaining some confidence in yourself and finding new community.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. I mean, our culture is kind of alienated. People don't find community that easily anyway.
Yeah.
So that's a real challenge. There are all these challenges. And one of the challenges is, how are you going to now have meaning in your life? Meaning isn't being handed to you, nor is there a big answer to all of life's questions. You have to learn how to deal with the ambiguity and complexity of how life really is. We don't know what happens after we die. We don't control everything, and we don't have a sky daddy to control everything. So there's some real tough work and maturity that's really called for to deal with life as it is, and then to enjoy the positives too, the special things about nature, the special things about relationships. There are all sorts of incredibly precious, wonderful things about life the way it is. For me, one of the things I've gotten into is photography.
Yeah.
I had a show in California called Noticing, and it was all pictures of unusual things. It was like a broken window that was made the shape of a bird, or some paint peeling, or a crack in the sidewalk with a plant coming through. There were all these little details that I took pictures of, and I'm still doing that. So creating and doing art and things like that really are valid. You're not just the subject of a creator. You are also a creator. And that's so important.
Oh, so important. I love that. Yeah. Thank you for saying all of that. Really beautiful. Just a quick point to go back to. I love how you made this connection of you'd rather have the truth over the comfort.
Uh-huh.
And that's a little bit of a connected or reframe for me, where I always think of that comfort experience as it's actually the certainty that brings the comfort. But I like the use of the word comfort so much better, because that's really what gets produced from the certainty, right? And it's really,
it's imagined certainty, put it that way. But it has been called a certainty addiction. Like you to live a life where you think you have to know everything for sure. And being addicted to that.
Yeah. Well, right. And the way that that somehow spiritual evolvement has to do with some ideal of perfection. It's really a recipe for a clamp down of oneself because of the unattainability of it all. That striving is just can be such a painful way to live, I think, instead of enjoying our humanity.
Yeah. Being complicated, people that mess up and get back online and doing the best we can. It's life is beautiful and complicated too.
Yes, right. So
in terms of work, I developed this organization called Journey Free, which provides direct services to people individually. There's one-on-one counseling or religious recovery coaching, we call it. There's a group, an online group that has a couple hundred members, and people are welcome to go to journeyfree.org and join the group directly. And we meet online Zoom sessions 3 times a month. And then there's a forum that you can interact with others. And this group is people all over the world, mostly in the US, but from all sorts of religious backgrounds, and sharing some of these same issues. It's amazing how many of the same issues we have.
It is. And this is where I think the group is so powerful. And my experience in it was really just so grounded, I'd say, in connection, that's sort of the thread, this really connected feeling between everyone, as there's so many different backgrounds, and yet, as you said, so many shared experiences and perspectives. So,
well, and you can talk about what you've gone through with your own religious recovery and have people actually hear you and believe you. And not be dismissing it or thinking that you exaggerate or do any of those re-wounding kinds of things. So you're safe from that, and people share and they see each other on future sessions and support each other through a lot of things. We also have a therapist support group or Helping Professionals group.
Before you go on there, actually, Marlene, I'd love to just let the group know also, one of the things that I love about the Journey Free environment is that also if people join, that there are many resources and there are different groups that you can join that are different topics that are really just such fun, and there's such a aren't we growing them now as well, that we have new ones kind of developing and people helping to monitor those and take those over. And, and so there's really, I would say there's kind of a place for everyone.
Yeah, there's subgroups. We talk about a lot of different things. We talk about sex, we talk about relationships, we talk about family, we talk about we give movie reviews. Anyway,
we've got LGBTQ specific resources. Yeah.
Meaning in life.
Different philosophies people can explore. I always think that's really helpful, resources that are humanism resources, nature-based resources, just things that are not kind of that spiritual bent, where people can find meaning potentially.
And the group is monitored. It's facilitated by therapists. It's these calls and also the forum are monitored and facilitated by professionals. So that makes it a little different from one of the many forums that you can get online, where it's just everybody saying whatever they want and it's kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
So, but there are lots of places to find support actually now compared to when I started, when there was really nothing.
Yeah.
But now there are quite a few places that you can go.
Yep. Yeah. But this is a very helpful resource. And then, of course, we have your Helping Professionals group, which I'm a part of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been such a lovely experience. These are really individuals who are engaged in this type of work with survivors. Mm-hmm. And we have the opportunity to discuss cases. We have topics that we focus on. So, and that has been a really lovely experience for me. Also really nice to just connect with others in the field.
Yeah. I'm glad you're in that.
Yeah.
And we talk about a lot of particular topics that are true for this population, because all the therapists and coaches and people that are in the group work with clients that are in recovery from religion. So we've looked at topics like how to work with the fear of hell, how to understand purity culture, how to work with finding meaning in life, and then also special groups like how to work with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, or the other day we had a session about Orthodox Judaism. So we look at all these different topics, and we have a library of archived sessions from the past that new people can always access.
Yeah.
So, that brings us pretty much up to date, except for the retreats. We also have retreats.
Yes. And so that's exciting. Those just kind of picked up again this year after COVID. And so I know you have one coming up that is the registration still open?
There might be 1 or 2 spots left, but that would be it. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, people can contact you for inquiries.
Okay.
And again, all that information will be in the show notes.
Okay.
And please share with us a little bit about, I know you have this really intriguing project coming up that is, the medium is film.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also a bit of a filmmaker. I've done various kinds of video and film over the years. And one thing I've done is written some feature screenplays. And the one that I'm working on now, well, we do have a draft of it, and I've been sharing it with folks. It was in my last newsletter. Oh, and also, if you want to know more about Journey Free stuff coming up, just go to the website and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get news. But the film, it's called Bless Me, and it's a story of a 20-year high school reunion of people that went to a Christian boarding school, and they get together and they compare their lives, and there's some fireworks and a rekindled romance, and opportunity to debate a lot of big important issues. So I've been putting out the word, looking for a producer to step in and take some leadership, but also hearing back from various people that want to be involved, a cinematographer and a composer and people like that want to help with it.
Oh, so
that's exciting. If anybody's, wanting to know more about them, just email me.
Wonderful. Great. Is there anything else that we're missing, or any final thoughts? Well, actually, maybe I could ask you also about this element, because the podcast has this bent for families and friends. I wonder if there's anything that you maybe advise, or some words around people who are in that position of having a child or a parent or family members that are still very devoted. And there's anything that you might, say or share?
Yeah, continue to be supportive and listen to what the person has to say. Be a good listener and encourage them to think for themselves. When they bring up something, to say, what do you think? Oh, that's interesting. And especially children never get asked what they think.
Yeah.
And yet, you're hearing it from a child and you go, well, what do you think about hell? And they go, well, I don't think it sounds very fair. You hear a child's point of view on it. Well, encourage that. Encourage critical thinking, and be available, and don't turn your back on them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Marlene. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And continue the good work. I'm really happy that you're doing this podcast.
We so hope that you enjoyed this episode, and please stay tuned for part of Leaving the Cult, the season 2 song written by Jaya Suri. And for all things related to Jaya, her music, ways that you can support her, check out the show notes.